Celebrate Thanksgiving with Safeway. This week at Safeway, get whole Signature Farms frozen turkey, 10 to 15.5 pounds for $8 each, or 16.1 to 22 pounds for $10 each. Member price of the minimum $50 purchase, limit one per household. Plus, packs of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, 7-Up, Dr. Pepper, or AHA sparkling water are buy two, get three free. Limit 3 free items. Also this week, get 5-pound bags of Signature Farms russet potatoes for 97 cents each with digital coupon. Limit 1. Visit Safeway.com or head in store for more details.
So the peasants took over London and burnt the town. They killed some royalty. They had their whole little doodah. And they forced King Richard to accept their demands. But once he was able to get a hold of some of his troops, he went back and he was like, I'm good. Actually, I'm going to, I don't want to do the things that we said that I'm going to do. I'm going to just take it back to the status quo. My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week, I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right. Thank you guys for tuning back in for another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. This week, we are talking about unions, and I didn't know much about unions, and I learned a lot about unions. I mentioned it later on, but it's like you see a lot of articles that start with the history of unions around like the 1700s or the 1500s, but it's like unions really go back like thousands of years before that, and I kind of touch on that a little bit before we get into the real meaty part of the unions. Let's see, what else is there to say? I mentioned before, I have bought the domain. I'm working on that website. That thing is a beast. I'm learning more every day, but it's going to be at least probably another couple weeks before it gets up and running, because I want it to look like something. I could, I have stuff on there now, but it's not quite what you want to. It's nothing to be proud of yet, but it will be soon. Let's see. And by now, because I said I record these kind of a little bit in the future, the minisodes are out. Bite-sized Bios is out. I see you guys are listening to a little bit. I think the first one was Shakespeare. The next one, oh gosh, I'm not even sure. Is it? I think it's Alexander the Great. And so that should be coming out, not accompanying this episode. I'm not even sure who will be doing by the time this one comes out. But just trying to have something else that's a little different that people like to listen to me talk and hear me talk about history and how things happen. You want to hear me talk about biographies too. That's what that's for. One more thing before we get out of here, before we go ahead and start the show, start the episode. Let's see, what am I watching right now? Of course, I'm locked in just like everybody else is on Dahmer. They just actually released the Conversations with a Killer about, with the real part about him, and that was really interesting. It really was. And even more, as I've watched so much of it, I realized that a large part of this was happening during the first year of my life. Like, not, I was born in 1991, and so to watch all this stuff, it's like in 1990, so it's like my mom was carrying me in the womb, and to see like my first year of life was like a lot of this dude was taking a lot of other people's lives during that time. It was, I don't know, it was a little meta for me when I was watching it the other day. But yeah, so that's what I'm watching. I don't want to bore you guys too much more. I appreciate all the interactions and stuff that I see on the Twitter page. Keep it coming. And without further ado, here's the episode. So I did a lot of research trying to find the first unions, and there's a lot of articles that say that they, can tell you when the first union happened and all this stuff. But what I ended up finding goes further back than a lot of the articles that I found. I found that basically it says that Egypt had the first unions, and so it says the first labor strike in recorded history. I thought this was pretty interesting. Took place in 12th century BCE in Egypt. And the strike was recorded on papyrus. So I mean, like, it actually, like, it's not like a rumor. It actually happened. Records of the strike refer to dates with reference to the then current pharaoh Ramses III during the 29th year of his reign. And so there were these artisans who were tasked with building burial chambers, and they would repeatedly go on strike because they weren't getting, they were basically getting insufficient food rations. They weren't getting paid enough in their food. And possibly also with, I guess that was basically how they were getting paid, so that they could live, and they weren't getting enough, and they had just about had enough. And so the custom was a monthly ration of grain, but implicit in the document is the sense that the ration had frequently been delayed during Ramses' reign. And so in the 29th year, the grain didn't show up till the 23rd day, which was evidently 23 days too long for them. When Amenemhat, an artisan and probably the dude who wrote down all this stuff on the papyrus, he complained to the local authorities, the pharaohs, and the rations during the 5th month were more than four. Like they said, they were 4 weeks late, so basically almost a month late. And the 6th month's rations were delivered 2 weeks into the month. So basically, you're a month late on one, and then the next month we don't get it for 2 weeks in. Like, these guys are really about had enough. And so remember, this is 12th century BCE, and in the 7th month of that 29th year, like I said, they had enough. And then one day, all the workers just laid down their tools and walked off the burial grounds. They were like, "We're done with this," right? And according to the guy who was recording all of this, their supervisors had no idea where they went, and then when they found them, they had no idea what to do because nobody had ever done this before. Nobody had ever just been like, "You're treating us unfairly. We've had enough." And so they really didn't, like, that's what even historians say. They're just like, they didn't really know how to handle the first strike. So let's see. Then when they walked off the burial grounds, they marched to their local government officials and they demanded that they be paid their actual food rations on time, right? And so the very next day, let's say they marched towards the temple of Ramses II, and they were able to speak with the mayor of, like, their specific little township area, I guess, within Egypt, and he was able to secure their ration payment, even though it wasn't the full thing they needed. So they went back to work. And there was more that I didn't put in here. Eventually, they kept doing this. Like they said, they did it until they kind of got them on track, and they ended up getting kind of what they wanted. So striking does work sometimes. All right, we're gonna move on. We're gonna move on to medieval strikes and rebellions during that time. This time in history is marked by a different type of social system, which I think is worth mentioning. It's not. Then, like, right now, it's not it's feudalism. It's not capitalism. So it's a little different as far as like how like money works and like how money is generated. So basically like the farmers would work, for and make goods for like basically the lords, and then the lords would take a percentage of those profits, like the probably like the larger percentage of those profits in exchange for the work. The lower guy would get basically a little bit of what he did, a little bit of the crops he'd made, a little bit of the money, and the protection from the barbarians or whoever would try to storm the town or the castle. It's medieval times. They may as well have had dragons or whatever, but like this is that's what they were doing. And so let's see. So that leads us to the basically one of their revolts when they were like, we've had about enough of that. And it does actually lead to growing out of feudalism. They're not this. I mean, I guess all of them kind of work in conjunction, but this is one of the ones that kind of makes Europe go from that to lean more towards free market capitalism. We have the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, and this is the English Parliament had raised taxes to help fund a war with France, and this coupled with the country still recovering from the Black Death, which, if you listen to this podcast regularly, it has been mentioned many times, and that the Black Death has not been fully eradicated. Do your research. Come at me. I swear. I saw it on Google. It's crazy. It's still out there. Something like 20 people a year still get the Black Death. The Black Death. Like the plague. But moving on. So the revolt was initially successful. And this, the peasants wanted the lowering of taxes, right, and the elimination of serfdom, which is essentially what kind of goes hand in hand with the feudalism is what was fueling the feudalism. But since like I said, it was successful because the English army was away fighting the French, and so the peasants took over London and burnt the town. They killed some royalty. They had their whole little doodah. And they forced King Richard to accept their demands. But once he was able to get a hold of some of his troops, he went back and he was like, I'm good. Actually, I'm gonna, I don't want to do the things that we said that I'm gonna do. I'm gonna just take it back to the status quo. So, but I mean, they did strike, and that's what this was all about. Like the idea, of union, and not that just unions are all about striking, but the striking is the idea of everybody coming together and agreeing that we all want better treatment, right? Which is kind of the basis of unions. That's why I'm starting with striking. I guess I should maybe say that earlier. I don't know, but that's, to me, it was kind of just inherent when you kind of look at it, and especially in the research. A lot of the research when you look up unions, it just starts with strikes. Okay, and so now we're going to move on to 18th century unions. In this story I'm about to tell you, or not story, but like this part, I'm about to tell you a story. But no, like this part of what I'm about to say is the part where a lot of people say that unions began. If you read a lot of articles, I guess they'll be like, oh, in 1768, I'm about to say a group of journeyman tailors orchestrated one of the earliest recorded strikes. And I guess they're not wrong. It's one of the earliest recorded. But I just read you guys a couple earlier than that. A journeyman is one who has completed an apprenticeship in a certain trade or craft that is certified to work under the supervision of a master. So just to kind of explain, what journeyman tailors are. The New York tailors were faced with a potential wage reduction. And with wages already lower than ever, the new wages wouldn't be enough to support a family. So they were just, it's almost kind of how it is out here right now. That they just keep, it's not matching up with, what the world's looking like on your paycheck. So in 1794, the first trade union was formed, and it was called the Federal Society of Journeymen Cordwainers. And I mentioned this in Philadelphia. I mentioned this in one of the episodes I've done. It's been a few now. I don't remember, but it was one of these. That they published their price requirements for continuity's sake, and they demanded shorter work days. So this was another example, like I'm saying, of them all coming together and being like, we all kind of, we're in competition. I guess we're working together, but we want to say this is what we agree that a man or woman, or at this time, should be getting paid for doing this job. So we're not all, no one's getting. Can't think of a good way to say it that's not derogatory. But you know what I mean. So basically, the unions went through their own issues in the UK as well. In 1799, unions were actually outlawed in England. In 1799, unions were actually outlawed in England when the Combination Act was passed, and this caused them to spring up as different types of organizations that seemingly had other focuses besides, organizing their workers and, workers' rights. They had things like philanthropic societies, and other stuff. I remember that there was another one. I can't remember. There was another one. I can't quite remember what it was called. But yeah, so like they briefly lifted the ban on these in the 1820s, but lo and behold, the strike started again, and so they put the ban back in place. Always, like I said, strikes and unions kind of seem to go hand in hand as we look through all the history. And now we get to 19th century unions. So we're up to another century. I mean, unions, as you see, when you really take it back, like I said, I read a lot of articles that really started right back where I was just talking about with those journeyman tailors. They were like, this is the first union. But I was like, I don't know. I'm doing research for me and for y'all, to try to figure out what's going on here. And so I was like, there's got to be more. There had to be somebody before 1768 had to be like, I don't like what's going on here. You know what I mean? You have to. But we're all the way up to the 19th century. And so unions began forming in the mid-19th century in response to the social and economic impact of the Industrial Revolution. And one of the first ones we have is called the Knights of Labor. And they were one of the first organized unions in America. They had chapters actually a few spots throughout the world, in Canada, the UK, and Australia. So it was the Knights were founded by a man named Uriah Stevens on December 28th, 1869. And by 1880, they had reached over 28,000 members. And then 4 years later, basically, times that by 4, they had almost 100,000 members, or over 100,000 members by 1884. And by 1886, 20% of all workers, basically, who existed in America, were part of that union. In some cases, they acted as a labor union, negotiating with employers, but it was never really well organized, and you will see that's one of the reasons why this union never actually didn't really last. There's one union that actually started around this exact same time, and I think I mentioned them later, but I do want to give them their credit because I think during my notes when I was writing it, I didn't realize that they did, so I don't think I went back and put it in there. But one of the ones that we will mention is still a union still today. I wanted to get that in there because these guys take it serious. I don't want anything to happen. You know what I mean? I'm giving you all your due. One of the real problems for the KOL, the Knights of Labor, was the Haymarket Square riot, or some just call it the Haymarket riot, which they were already, like I said, disorganized to begin with. But then when you get into stuff like this, which I'm about to tell you, a lot of people were like, we're just going to distance ourselves from you. And so the Haymarket riot, or the Haymarket massacre, if some have called it, happened on May the 4th, may the 4th be with you, in 1886. And it was a fight in the streets between the police and union workers, most of which were the Knights of Labor in Chicago, Illinois, right? And so it began the actual massacre. There was a rally, and then the massacre began when someone at the rally threw a bomb into the crowd of mainly police officers, and that occurred towards the end of the labor demonstration because the cops were trying to break up the rally. And so, but the rally was for the 8-hour workday. They say an unknown person threw a dynamite bomb at the police while they were trying to break up that rally. After the bomb went off, there was an exchange of gunfire between the police and the rally attendees. An anonymous police official told the Chicago Tribune, quote, "A very large number of the police were wounded by each other's revolvers. It was every man for himself, and while some got 2 or 3 squares away, the rest emptied their revolvers mainly into each other," end quote. I mean, that's in the newspaper. So, and basically they're saying that a lot of these cops, in reaction to the bomb going off, just started, just like shooting each other, thinking they were shooting somebody else. And in total, 7 cops died, as well as 4 civilians also were killed. And another cop actually died 2 years later from injuries that he got during that day. So we can up that number to 8, I guess I will. Yeah. It remains the single most deadly incident of officers being killed in the line of duty in the history of the Chicago Police Department. 8 people were convicted of the crime, but only 2 of them were actually at the Haymarket Square. So there was a lot of, question and mystery about who, when they got these guys, were these guys the guys who actually did it? Maybe they're bad guys, but were they the guys who actually did the crime? 4 of them were hanged, so you like to hope, God rest their souls, one committed suicide before he could be hanged. And like we mentioned earlier, the riot is one of the reasons that the Knights of Labor started to actually decline, because people were like, we can't really be associated with this dynamite throwing, cop killers is kind of, yeah. And right here, actually, like I said, is in my notes where I mentioned the American Federation of Labor, because I found out about them later, kind of after I was reading about this Haymarket massacre stuff. But they're actually they merged with another union, and I'm not sure what the name of that union is. I don't think I say it here, but it's AFL-CIO. And so, but this American Federation of Labor, this union started around the exact same time as the Knights of Labor. And then what happened is, after the Haymarket massacre, a lot of people left the Knights of Labor and then went to the American Federation of Labor. And that's pretty much about as far as I want to go with unions. I'll mention a little bit from I would say the early 20th century on to about the mid 20th century, because I know that's what everybody wants to hear about. But I don't really talk too much about Jimmy Hoffa in this podcast. If you already realize, it's not this, I'm really not about any of that. It's really just about how do we get the organization of workers. So I'll just run through this really fast. Let's see. In the early 1930s, as the nation slid toward the Depression, the future of organized labor was not really looking too good. And in 1933, labor union membership was around 3 million, but 10 years before that, it had been almost double that. So basically, people were not in unions the same way they were. Most union members in 1933 belonged to skilled craft unions, and they were usually a part of the AFL, as we just talked about. A large part of the union success in the 20th century, from kind of basically from the 20s and 30s on to about the 50s and 60s, has a lot to do with the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933. That was Roosevelt's baby, and we're talking FDR, not old TR. Then we get to the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, which is also known as the Wagner Act, and this required businesses to bargain in good faith with any union supported by the majority of their employees. This is pretty big. I mean, I'm sure unless there's some other sweeping legislation that counters this is probably still helping people out to this day. So as I said, the heyday of unions was really from the 20th century to the mid 50s. Membership in unions began to decline around that time, like I said, in the 50s, and today around 1 in 10 of workers are part of a union, but that's changing every day. I know we see, Starbucks just started to try to unionize, and unions are still a hot topic of conversation. I would imagine, whenever anybody who has any real idea of unions, when they hear, and you run a business or something, when you hear about that, I do believe it runs chills, sends chills down your spine. But I wasn't really sure how to end this one, as far as to say this is when unions happen. I mean, what is this, episode 45? And I'm a little bit stumped. I'd say they happened about 100 years previous to when I, began talking about, chronologically, but I guess we'll just say right here. And that is how unions happened. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're going to round it up. The first labor strike in recorded history was in Egypt during the reign of Ramses III. Strikes continued throughout the Middle Ages, with the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 being very influential. Unions began organizing in larger numbers in the 19th century, with groups like the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor. Legislation in the early 20th century helps to cement labor unions in industries across the country. Things I didn't know before, and now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? I've got a few here this week that are pretty good. Things I didn't know before, and some get a little dark, but I think some of the more interesting things about these strikes and these unions is how much people were willing to risk life and limb for the jobs that they had or have or want to keep. And so we'll start with the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire, which is influential because it basically led to a lot of safety regulations in buildings. But before that, 150 people had to die, most of them young women. And so, there was a fire in a building in 1911. They were over on the Lower East Side, and when the fire broke out, nobody could get out of the building because they had locked all the windows and doors, basically, which was, I guess they said it was the standard practice at that time because it stopped people from taking unauthorized breaks or stealing stuff. But basically, when it happened, no one could get out of the building, so everybody died. It was, I think it was mostly women, a lot, like 20 or so men. In that 146 people, and a lot of them they were in age between 14 to 23. I think was the average age of people, somewhere in there. So, but this is showing the working conditions that would have been necessary for people to feel like they had to strike, and that's kind of why I thought this was interesting. Why this shows up within things I didn't know before. But we'll move on to the next thing. Let's see, Nordic countries. We got Iceland, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway. They are 5 of the 6 most unionized nations in the world, according to some data from 2012. A whopping 82.6% of Iceland's workers belong to a union. Over 80% of the people there are unionized. It's interesting. This next one is a little tidbit about why a strike is called a strike. So let's see. Why is a labor stoppage called a strike? Because in 1768, English sailors, unhappy about a wage cut, expressed their anger by taking down or striking the sails on the ships in the port of London. So that is where we get the term strike from, because they messed up those sails, and they were like, those guys are striking those sails. What are they doing? They're striking. They're on strike. You see how that just kind of keeps going. Let's see. I think I may have one more. That might be it. Yeah, I mean, the other one is just a really sad story about some miners that I don't know. I don't want to gloss over it. They definitely lost their lives, but there was this really bad strike in the mines. I believe it was in West Virginia, where these guys are basically fighting the government, and like 100 or so, I think, of the government, like 30 of the miners end up getting killed because they're like shooting back and forth at each other. But yeah, I just don't want to make it too dark before we get out of here. So I'll leave you. This was real vague. I'll leave you on the real vague topic of death. But yeah. All right, that's been another episode of How Did That Happen? Always appreciate you guys stopping by to press play, finding out how things happen with me. We'll keep trying to progress this podcast and grow on to new things. Can't wait for the website to come out, and can't wait for Bite-Sized Bios to grow and see all the different type of people that we profile. But that's it for this week. See you guys in a couple days.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right. ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.